listeners. Thank you once again for joining me for the Lessons from the Playroom podcast. I have another amazing guest on our episode today, Dr. Bonnie Goldstein. We're going to get into sensorimotor psychotherapy work specifically with children, and I'm so excited for this conversation with Bonnie. For those of you that are not familiar with Bonnie, let me go ahead and tell you a little bit about her. She is the founder and the director of the Lifespan Psychological Center. She's also a faculty member at the Sensorimotor Psychotherapy Institute. And one of the cool things that we're going to talk about later, everyone, is that she has a manuscript right now at Norton Publishing, where she and Pat Ogden have written a book on sensorimotor psychotherapy work with kids. I'm so excited to hear more about that, Bonnie. She's written other books. She teaches around the world. She does so many things. She has so many different accolades, but truly, Bonnie, what I know of you is that you have a heart of gold in this work and are really out there to make a huge difference with kids and families. And I am so excited that you're a guest on this podcast. So thank you so much for joining me.
And thank you. It's so lovely to be part of this community that you have created and to embrace people on this journey together on how we can utilize our own sense of self and our work with our clients. I'm hoping both to give tools and also ideas for ourselves as therapists, as parents, as helpers of the next generation coming up, and really to help with tools with our clients, our younger clients and their families.
Yeah, absolutely. Bonnie, should we start by sharing with everyone how we met?
Love it.
Love it. It was a random, but not random meeting in that years ago, you and I were both over in Melbourne, Australia at the International Trauma Conference. The Australian Childhood Foundation was putting on their world-renowned trauma conference, and we both found ourselves at dinner one night in the same group of individuals. And Bonnie, I don't know what your experience was, but I know for me at the end of the night, you and I were like cuddled up, like we were like holding hands, and like it was like an immediate like, hi, I like you.
You have this sense of joie de vivre or joy about you. And as we kept on speaking, we could see how our paths were integrating, even though I'm based in Los Angeles and you're in Colorado. It felt like we were kindred spirits.
And I know, meeting over at dinner in Melbourne. And so this conversation has been a long time coming, and it's lovely to see you again and to be able to talk with you. So Bonnie, I would love for you to share with everyone, you're talking about paths. What was your path? How did you find your way into the world of sensorimotor psychotherapy?
For many of us, my cohorts and myself who had studied psychodynamic psychotherapy, psychoanalytic psychotherapy in the 80s and 90s, found ourselves realizing that there are missing pieces. And through my lens, I was initially trying to understand things such as how the body influences the mind, how mindfulness and mind-body awareness come together and create shift the narratives. We all, as clinicians, have had those patients who are stuck, or patients who find themselves going to one therapist and then the next one and the next one, carrying the same concerns, but really not crossing over. So initially, when I started studying in 2003 with Dr. Ogden, with Dr. Pat Ogden, it was all about learning tools to bring back to my existing practice. And then over the course of learning about the somatic awareness, the somatic body, somatic intervention, and really reshaping the experience that is imprinted, the procedural learning, the impact of earlier experiences on how we present in the world, that I found myself becoming more of what I'll consider a body-based therapist, a sensorimotor psychotherapist, utilizing talk therapy, also coming in from bottom up. So top down, looking at the words, but not just the words, and then looking at the body and interweaving the two.
Mhm. So, what was it in your exploration that made you go, I want to figure out how to do this with kids. I want to open up the conversation and bring sensory motor work into the realm of children and families. Because originally, if I'm correct, it was really just focused on adults. And you've been with Pat, you've been bringing it to the littles.
Bringing it to the littles and to the littles and all of us adults.
Yeah.
Because the beauty of the sensorimotor psychotherapy lens is we're working with parts of ourselves from younger ages.
Mm-hmm.
And when one's studying the developmental impingers, the developmental traumas, those moments that we've all had and how they imprint our lives, I started utilizing some of the exercises that in the experiential trainings we were doing for ourselves. In the trainings, we have a partner that we're working with, another therapist. We're practicing some of these tools on them. I took those into the office. I started practicing with my clients. I would say to parents, I've been learning some new ways of looking at these issues. What if we try? What if we look at, or I'd say to the kids, I'm curious. Now that's one of the best pieces of sensorimotor psychotherapy is collaborative curiosity together. So I might say that. I wonder what happens if, or I would take an exercise, perhaps a breath exercise that say I'm working with a child or I'm working with a teenager, and I notice that as they start to tell the story, maybe their shoulders go in or their head goes down. In fact, you're doing it right now. What if all of you, as you watch Lisa and I, watch our shoulders, our head go down, the tightness that we experience. Now, in this posture, perhaps I've just told about a traumatic experience. I'm no longer making eye contact. Try to take a deep breath. It's very difficult to hear as I'm teaching.
Very challenging. It's very constricted.
So I would say to a child, hey, I have a trick. I notice your shoulders are in, your heads are down. Let's together see what happens if, and then I start opening my arms. Let's see what happens if I open my arms and I sit up. Let's take a breath. Notice what's happening right now in this moment. And I might see things such as they're breathing better. Thinking of one very traumatized boy. He started pulling at his shirt. He goes, I'm having a hard time. And he was on the edge of a panic or a reaction to talking about this horrific childhood experience that he was reliving in the office. So we were able to drop beneath the words, first with this body posture, then with resourcing his body and slowing things down. I'm noticing even as I'm teaching, I'm slowing down along with what I'm teaching, but that was the experience in the office. In a sense, I was helping him to co-regulate. I helped him to sit back, open up, to notice his breath. At one point, I suggested he puts his hand on his heart. This exercise through our mindfulness community has been done for so many years, and it's embedded in the sensorimotor psychotherapy work, but it's more of a embedded relational mindfulness, where I might notice what's happening. I might say, hey, even I'm noticing whatever comes up as I'm working with a client.
Yeah.
And with that example of the boy I'm thinking of, he was a 6-year-old. And as he's talking about the trauma and the violation he experienced, and he's losing his breath, the first thing we needed to do was we wanted to help him ground himself, feet on the ground. We helped him put his hands on his legs and knees and notice and come back into contact with me. And he was willing to try things because it was proposed in the spirit of, hey, why don't we try? Or I have an idea. Or I might say to someone who comes in, I'm thinking of another traumatized girl who came in, speaking a mile a minute, never taking a breath, and the words as a defense, as a protection. And at one point, she took a breath. And And I said, whoa, that was a big breath after all those words. It's really great that you can take a breath. Take your time. We have all the time we need. You can take time to breathe in between your talking. And I remember her, she peeked up at me. And she came from a very large family where you had to speak quickly because someone would sneak in on you. They had at dinner, they would have a bucket of chicken. And she would describe that they got the big buckets of Kentucky Fried Chicken, but if she didn't grab quickly, she'd be left with a wing. She described it just like that. Left. You could see the connection in her body.
Feel it.
Feel it. So I went right with, yeah, I can see right now as you think about that if you don't go very quickly or use your words or use your body or grab at, there won't be anything left for you. And in that moment, she slowed down and you could see the tears come to her eyes. And we could drop into the moment of being together, dropping beneath the words, slowing things down. Now I'm thinking of all of the exercises that we learn as adults for working with our adult population in sensorimotor psychotherapy. But if we go back to your question, they all seem so ripe for trying out with kids. So I set up my video camera back before we all had iPhones. This is dating, where now any of us can pop our iPhone on a little tripod and we're set, push a button. So I had all my video equipment and I found kids love to be videotaped. More importantly, they and their parents would love to watch the session that we videotaped, at which point I could use it as psychoeducation. They see here, look at this minute, what your body did. If we go back to this posture, they could see their body in this posture. I also have a mirror we have a series of offices. In our offices, we have a mirror that are freestanding. We can pull them out and have the mirror beside us so that we can tilt it towards our younger clients and show them what we're seeing. In the video, you can catch clients looking at the video of themselves, noticing with us, noticing what happened right before. So that's where the beauty of sensorimotor psychotherapy, it's not just noticing the body-based movement. It's going with what we notice, following that, using that to notice what pre-existing beliefs, thoughts, feelings, what transpired and how it informs our body. I'll give you another example of that. I'm thinking of a really young child, and she's now 17 and she's given us permission to show her videos from when she was 4. So when we do the sensory motor training for kids, we're able to show the videos and have pieces of her reflecting on her memory of herself back then. She's 4 years old, adorable little girl, comes in and you can see she just wants to disappear. And her body tells us that, the way she sits. So I comment on that and I say, looks like you just want to be all cocooned up. Let's do that together. And we took pillows, part of the props in our office, and piled up the pillows. And she says, this feels great. As we're piling up pillows, yeah, this feels great. And at one point she had pillows everywhere, including all on top of her. And there was a little peephole, so she could see out. I couldn't see in, and she loved that. And she laughed about that. And then as we spoke further, she was able to use her hands and do this. And she was able to let go of all those pillows with the biggest laugh. And as she did that, and as she started to laugh, you could see her body settle. She felt safe in the room. And then we were able to work with big feelings and small feelings and titrating the two. At one point, we had her do the choo-choo train game. This is a game that Pat Ogden taught me, that we speak about for kids of all ages, adults too. But for this little one, she would go in the room as a choo-choo train, jumping from blocks to blocks. Choo, 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 very slow. And then I'd say, now what happens if the train speeds up? Choo, 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 choo. Now this is all on tape. She's watching herself learn to regulate through the play. As we start to look at the meaning beneath, we spoke about her family constellation, the presenting issue. She had parents who were breaking up. There was very little supervision, and she had two older brothers that would physically beat up on each other. And she was very clever. She thought, I don't want to be in the middle of that. They never touched her because she learned to disappear while being in a room. We had an image, she and I, of the Wicked Witch in The Wizard of Oz, where I'm melting. That was her. She would be able to melt away, almost disappear. Now that worked and was very effective in her family so that she didn't get pounced on. Yeah. When she went to school, that became problematic because she was the child who didn't speak, who disappeared. Her body language was this. She was hesitant. The label slow to warm up comes to mind. So many different things were going on for her in an environment such as meeting me. And so we have to utilize some of the tools of sensorimotor through the lens of play. Yeah. And that's an example of how we might look at big and small, doing it with breath, big breath, small breath, body movements, big and small, pushing boundaries, all of these exercises that are ones we look at in sensorimotor psychotherapy, but applying them now to children.
It's so beautiful, Bonnie. I'm a firm believer that if the therapy does not include the body, it's really missing. I mean, it's just missing a pretty significant piece of the puzzle. And I've always had a real deep appreciation for sensorimotor psychotherapy. And someone said to me one time, he says, it's really important to know the narrative of the developmental trauma. Like, do you have to go back and do you have to know it? And what I shared in the moment was, you do know it. It's right in front of you.
It's beautiful. Yes.
It's right there.
You do know it. It's right there.
It's right there. And what I'm hearing you say is that so much of sensorimotor psychotherapy work is reading that story and reading the story through the body and working with the story in its aliveness in the body. And I'm saying that, so please correct me if I'm wrong as I'm saying that, if that's not quite it, but that's the felt sense as I'm hearing you speak and as I'm hearing your examples. And there's so much richness in going through the body. So brilliant.
That was said just so accurately. If we look at the sensorimotor psychotherapy training and all of the readings, Pat Ogden has 3 books. You can, as an audience, get those books, start to learn about the concepts. They all apply to kids, but as you said, it's right there. The felt sense, the somatic, the body, all right at our fingertips. We just haven't yet learned to ask the questions or look. And that raises another point. It's always collaborative. We're not taking anyone anywhere they don't want to go. Consistently asking, how would it be if? How do you feel now? Is it okay if we? And whenever someone says no, really reinforcing that. I'm so glad you were able to set a boundary with me. I'm so glad you recognize that right now that's not a good time, or maybe not ever. That boundary. And then I might bring up, I use my hands to set up boundaries. You let me know with your words boundaries. And that opens another chapter of different ways to set personal boundaries, or to be able to do something we couldn't do when we were kids. As kids, we're not equipped perhaps to say no. Some kids never learned how to effectively set a boundary or a space for themselves. Or when they tried, they were squashed. Their spirit was squashed.
So my personal experience and my own training understanding around attunement leads me to understand that I actually can't read someone else's body or story well unless I can read my own, or unless I have a sense of my own story that's alive in my own body. Will you speak to that part of that part of the work? Because I think that that's a conversation that needs to happen more and more and more in our therapy field around like what's happening on this side of the equation, and what do we need to do over here from from a body-based perspective, so that we actually can attune to and do the very things that you are that you're talking about. Will you speak to that a little bit?
I'm so glad you asked that question. When we look traditionally at traditional psychotherapy, before we become an analyst, we have our own experience of analysis, so we can know ourselves better. If we embrace that concept through the lens of sensorimotor psychotherapy, the training itself, the learning how to do the model, using our own experience, our own body, we're learning about ourselves. In every session, I am now highly attuned to my experience in ways that I never used to be before. I'll give you a perfect example. In days long ago, when I felt sleepy in the midst of a session, and haven't we all as therapists had clients with which we find ourselves sleepy, I would do an interpretation. Something's not being said, something's not happening in the room. But now I'm able to utilize that experience, check in with myself, I check in with my body. I might even raise it with my clients saying, it seems like right here, right now, something may be missing for you or for me. I'm noticing my body feels a bit sluggish and it wasn't that way prior. Let's notice together what's going on. Or I've worked with kids where they come in and they lay down and go to sleep. And I'll say, hey, let's go downstairs and make a cup of hot cocoa. Or we could take a walk around the block. We have a therapy dog that's in all of our sessions. We can take the puppy on a walk. I have a room with a swing that is the most effective child-friendly room. Indoor swing that it's butts up against a wall, so you can swing freely. But when you're feeling, say, sluggish or angry, you can sit in the swing and kick against the wall. And I have, again, videotapes, thinking of one of the boys who comes in with his dad, and we do a family session together, and the father's busy saying, here's what you did wrong. You can see the boy getting angry because he likes coming to Bonnie as long as we don't have to talk about the problems. So he then sits in the swing and kicks against the wall, and kicks hard against the wall. We luckily have plywood walls. They're very strong, firm plywood walls butting up against the swing, so he can swing freely, but if he wants to, he extends his leg, kicks against the wall while dad is talking about the problems. And then it allows him to tolerate all the feelings and all the anger and all that's going on. And I'm checking in, back to your question, about what's going on in my body. Because I also, do I take care of dad's needs to talk about the problem? Take care of what I'm noticing happening right now, which is this boy wants to bolt. You can see it in his legs. His legs start getting activated. He's ready to get up and leave the room. But the swing allows him to tolerate being in there. And as he's kicking against it or twirling on the swing, there's a sense of calm that happens. There's a sense of ease that he's able to tolerate, even hearing about his most problematic behavior. And with this boy, and again, this on the video, you'll see him, he lets us know when he needs a break. When he wants to say, Dad, stop. And he might do this a lot, putting up his hand. Dad then takes a breath. You ready? No, not yet. Okay. Are you ready now? So he's controlling not the topic, but the rate at which he has to hear about his misbehaviors, problem issues, challenges. And so this boy was able to stay in the room with us, laugh playfully. He loved being able to do that, where he puts his hand up. He loved being able to control with the swings, because then at the end, he could let go and he would swing backwards and he would laugh and laugh and laugh. And that became for him a joyous concomitant to troubling dialogue with dad.
Yeah.
So it's, again, one of the many props that we have found. We also have a hammock in our office, in our outdoor office. So we have lots of different movement and ways of moving, weighted blankets, lots of the tools. Every tool that an occupational therapist might utilize can be woven in. And as we've discussed in some of our papers and on the Sensorimotor Psychotherapy website, there are some free workshops that at the onset of the pandemic, I offered one, Pat Ogden and I offered one. There are others that are either low fee or free that you can access to get more of description of these kinds of tools. And of course, the trainings. There's nothing more powerful than trainings to learn the tools as therapists so that we can learn, as you were asking about, Lisa, we can learn about our bodies, about our reactions, about what happens inside of us when a client's issues create for us so much transference or perhaps countertransference, where we get so triggered in response to our clients, or they get so triggered in response to us.
Yeah. Yeah. It's yes. I'm just over here going, yes, 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 yes.
Great. Great. That's, if therapy is not playful, we will lose our kids. And if we look back to Jaak Panksepp, the late, he passed away a few years ago, but he speaks about the import of play, the essential nature of play as part of healing and as part of wellness, and working with those play centers in the brain, as he did in his research. Therapy for us becomes play.
Yeah.
Much of the time I'm following our clients, but I'm also in my own way redirecting so that I'm not just a playmate, but we're doing therapeutic interventions through the lens of play.
You know what I also love about this conversation, particularly in the context of this podcast, since it is mostly play therapists, I find that play therapists can sometimes become attached to this idea that you have to use toys, right? Or that play is something that requires toys or miniatures, or you have to have an office full of what toys traditionally would be looked at, even though culturally not every culture has toys like we do in the Western world and whatnot. And I often find that play therapists forget that that the body, if we're going to go with toy, right? The body, the relationship, the therapist, like we are essentially the most important ingredient, in the space. And I love that also about what you're saying is that the work isn't dependent upon something you have in a room. The work isn't dependent upon filling your space with certain things or necessarily analyzing the metaphor of the things that you were using and that kind of thing. But it's more about what's arising right now in you, in this moment, in me, between us. And there's something really, I think, profound about that, really, Bonnie. There's a depth to it that's really quite extraordinary when we're using this right here.
The most important toy you're saying is their own body and body awareness, our own body, and the dance, even if we're not physical. And working with kids doesn't necessitate physicality. We're working with push, which is one of the Bonnie Brainbridge Cohen movements that we'll work with. We can use a pillow, pushing the pillow against our clients and they push back, or pull, we can use a rope. There are so many props that are not toys, and we have many pebbles. When you walk up to our office, we have a large fountain and the sounds of trickling water, and then we could take a pebble and explore grasping the pebble, holding the pebble, letting go of the pebble. Each of these movements, integral to sensorimotor psychotherapy. What are we letting go of? And those pebbles and the letting go become a toy all its own. Color. I am such a proponent of color in the offices and choices. As I said, my associates and I, we have 4 offices plus an outdoor office. Thank you, COVID. One of the gifts of COVID is I've been working outdoors with clients in an outdoor Zen garden. And there's a natural sense of choice. So I'll say to my clients, which office do you want to work in today? They probably will go for either the outdoor where the hound is, or the swing office, or what we call the treehouse office upstairs, because it is upstairs and we've made it feel very much like a treehouse because we're surrounded by trees. We have one large group office because for our older kids, for our tweens and teens, sensorimotor psychotherapy groups are so important. And Lisa, I'll get you a couple of the articles that I've written, one of them with Pat Ogden, a couple on my own, about working in group, utilizing sensorimotor psychotherapy, so that our listeners can glean some of the tools that I haven't had a chance to discuss,
Yes.
but in one large room with nothing but similar chairs or similar seating spaces, so that you're able to have cozy, comfortable, the pillows and the blankies become the toys, scarves, a bag of scarves and different, we have lots of different size balls, large exercise balls, small balls, half balls, Abasu balls. Often when you're talking, say, with a parent and child, there's a height differential. And so I try to have the eye gaze similar. So I'll have the little kids on the biggest balls, and then I'll have the parent on the tiny ball, so that they're just the right eye level, which that's a tool that years and years ago, when I studied with Virginia Satir so many years ago, and they were looking at the family therapy modality. She had an exercise that would have a child stand up very tall onto a table, onto a chair, supportedly safe, and have the parent squelch down on the ground. What's it like for you as the child, usually the identified client or the identified patient, having them talk to their parents? And then switching it. And it's a very interesting thing with eye gaze and safety and self-regulation, and being able to use eye gaze to self-regulate.
And one of the videos, Bonnie, that I've seen of your work with children was you have a friend that just joined you.
I let the audience know what's so noisy. This is our therapy dog.
The therapy dog is just
Brooklyn.
hello.
And Milo, for some of you who've seen the older tapes or will, they're on the Milo was on the video, and now Brooklyn has taken over as the therapy dog. So that's the ambient background noise for any of you who are hearing a whistling or a whispering. Sorry about that.
There's a friend in the background. In this video, Bonnie, you have, if I remember correctly, it's a young boy and his parents, and you have him. He's lying down on the ground, and there's a yoga ball, and he is instructing. If I remember this correctly, they're taking the yoga ball and they're rolling the yoga ball up and down his body for some proprioceptive input. Am I remembering this video? And I remember in the video there was something quite lovely about it, where he was giving them instruction about how to move the ball, how much pressure to put on the ball, and it was just a beautiful moment of watching a child become aware of what he needed, ask for it, have the parents in an attuned way respond back, and it was a lovely clip. And so I know we're talking about, you have your story of the one parent, and then we're talking about different family things, and you can use this with families too, is I guess what I wanted the audience to know, because I've seen it. I've seen a part of a video where the child really got to be empowered in that process.
Now, that was one of my favorite sessions, and the family has been kind enough to let us use it when we're teaching the child trainings. This was the identified patient in the family, the problem boy, everything, blame, 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 as parents often do. And then there's the perfect sibling, as families dynamics are. And so when we took this large ball, and he had some of the expected responses of an ADD high energy boy with a little sister. So he was always moving and wiggling. And I think there was trauma because the second child was cesarean. So his little sister kept mom away for 5 days and it wasn't explained. When mom and the little sister came home, he wasn't able to return her to wherever she came from. She was there to stay. And so those were some of the presenting issues. And you could see it in his body. So I said, I wonder what would happen if we had you lay down, and I took a blanket, he laid on the blanket. And if we were to take this large ball and roll it up, we could make it like a pancake. And he loved it and he was giggling. So already the idea of rolling this ball, and then who do you want to roll the ball? He said, mom, then mom and dad, then mom, dad, and little sister. And no matter how much weight they would put on, he wanted more. He was begging, I want more pressure, more pressure. At one point, all three of them were sitting on top of the ball, right on his legs. And he goes, this feels great. And they were looking. And then we were able to begin the dialogue about how he really is experienced in this family and how to meet his needs. And the discussion in the family had been, we're afraid to go on an upcoming family trip to visit a relative who was ill because we're afraid he's going to ... dysregulate. And so we came up with tools, and one of them was the deep pressure. They purchased weighted blankets and they gave him space so that he could have all the pillows. I believe when they stayed at a family member's house, he was piled up. He called it the pile up, or he piled up the pillows. He was king of the pillows. He could sit on top. They could pile them on top. And it allowed him to regulate because he was 9. He didn't want to be the problem. He wanted to break the cycle. And mom's experience, and this was so touching. At one point, she became so emotional, realizing the system and how disconnected. She said, I feel like you're finally understanding me, and I'm finally understanding you, as she looked at the boy. And it was a moment of deep connection that was wonderfully surprising for me. That's the other thing. I wasn't going anywhere specifically other than to regulate, but I was ready to pivot in the moment and go with what came up. And using that ball, I'm thinking of another child. This was a 3.5-year-old. We used this on video. You may have seen her at the conference because it was an all-day presentation where this little girl that I showed, we call her Ginger because of her red hair. She would pull out her hair. She had such a challenge with trichotillomania that the doctors wanted her to get therapy, but she didn't want to meet with the suits, as the parents described the other doctors before they came to me. So you come to my colorful office, and there were no toys. Going back to your question, there are balls and scarves and ropes and swings. Those are the toys, as opposed to more of what we consider the traditional toys. And in my mind, I wanted to use the ball for the same pancake, self-regulation. She wanted nothing to do with it. She wanted to kick the ball with her feet. That became the access route. And using the sensorimotor psychotherapy nomenclature, through her feet and through kicking the ball, we were able to come up with the story of what needed to happen for her. Hers was a whole other situation, but it was an example of how I was able to shift, let go of my use of the ball, and learn from our younger clients about where to go and what to do. And in that session, the parents came up with so many wonderful tricks, such as if you're working with a child who has a habit that is not a good one, that we could apply this, because I have, to thumb sucking. Often the behavior of the trichotillomania, or the thumb sucking, even if it's disastrous for the dental, or some of the other habits that kids may have, happen often in a car. So they set up a small ball on the back seat of the car, and as they drove, she would kick the ball down into the ground. When she would go to bed at night, she had just got her big girl bed. She was 3.5. The big girl bed was big. She didn't have the containment of the crib. We had a half ball, the Bosu ball, attached to the back of the headboard. So as she fell asleep, she kicked the ball and she would fall asleep, instead of falling asleep by pulling her hair. Just by symptom substitution, we switched to something that was very healthy for her. That intervention was co-created she and I, this little girl and I, based on my having a different agenda of doing the rolling the ball and realizing that wasn't what her body was asking for.
Her energy wanted to come out her feet.
Exactly. That was her access. And we could look at why, but the whys are less important than, wow, look what your feet are wanting to tell us. Let's go with that. And then coming up with all kinds of different interventions with her feet.
Amazing. So, Bonnie, I know there's listeners right now that want to learn more and want to know where they can go to, to learn more. I want you to talk briefly about the book that's coming out. So will you let our listeners know where they can keep hearing more of this great stuff?
Perfect timing as our puppy's starting to squeak with the toys. Sensorimotorpsychotherapy.org lists all the trainings, and we have workshops around the world. But another one of the gifts of these last 2 years, these so challenging last 2 years, has been Sensorimotor Psychotherapy also has an online training so that we're able to access areas of the world that have wanted to learn but not been able to. So we have in each of the Central America's time zones, different trainers training and international trainings. So from wherever you're listening, you can access the basic foundational training along with reading Sensorimotor Psychotherapy. Pat Ogden, Google her on Amazon, you can get the books. For the child workshops, I teach around the world. So check with the Sensorimotor Psychotherapy office and find out when our next child-oriented training. But when I say child, it's children of all ages, including our adult, and including our parents. We as parents, and I'm a parent now, I'm a grandparent as well. Parents, grandparents, children, all of those issues, caretakers, are encapsulated in the child lens and the child trainings. I am going to get you some papers so that you'll be able to share that with your reader. And I invite a dialogue, both with myself and with any of the sensory motor trainings who are in your area. You can ask them the child-related questions, because the developmental training really focuses on the early stages of attachment-based interactive training. The trauma-based or more isolated traumas, either large T traumas, ongoing traumas, chronic traumas, medical traumas, each of those kids also experience. And so we're able to look at, through the lens of childhood, the tools. And then our book, The Patience of Norton. As we complete this book together, it's been a wonderful labor to be comprehensive and also brief enough. And so stay tuned for that book, which the manuscript is nearing completion so that we can get that in and get that out for everybody. Until then, also the Sensorimotor Psychotherapy website. You can ask the office, you can access these free workshops that I've done, you can access the articles that I've written, that my colleagues have written on some of the adult trainings.
Beautiful. What a perfect ending there. Our friend is saying, bravo, bravo, bravo.
The friend is saying, goodbye, everybody, right? So thank you all for listening and for being part of this and being curious about making a change for your clients and for yourselves. And thank you, Lisa, for having me on the show.
Absolutely. Listeners, thank you once again for being a part of this podcast. And as always, take care of yourselves. You are the most important toy in that playroom.
Beautiful.